Brilliant, thanks for the introduction. So we've heard some really kind of fascinating insights from Paul, Sarah and Mark, and these are all looking at what, in my mind, the aspirations are for digital twins. However, the only way we're going to achieve this is through actually engaging those that are going to be using, building, and consuming from digital twins. And this is only going to be achieved through kind of providing a landscape for those groups to be supported through. And this is where the Digital Twin Hub comes in, and this is kind of where it becomes really exciting in my mind. So at a very simplistic level, the Digital Twin Hub is a collaborative, web-enabled community. And what do we really mean by that is, at a very simple level, there'll be some form of online presence through forums, through discussion groups, through webinars, all of these sorts of mechanisms for people to engage in an online manner to discuss digital twins, to share their experiences, to look at how they might be able to overcome challenges in a shared group. But it's actually a lot more than that. It's about how can we actually take a community on this journey together and grow our learning, not just about what digital twins are, but about what will be possible through digital twins in the future. So we have some very simple kind of objectives at a very high level on how can we build consensus on the Gemini principles that Mark just mentioned. How can we iterate those and really start to think about how can we make those as applicable as possible? How can we take some of the really interesting work that will come out from streams such as the Commons around the information management framework, about how can we actually integrate these digital twins together and make something that isn't just good in theory, but actually works in reality and is practically deliverable. So we've got this kind of very high-level set of objectives, and the bits to understand from here are that we don't want to shy away from problems or from successes. We're there to learn from both of those. So as organizations start to go through their kind of digital twin development journeys, it's really important that from that we can see what went well and what didn't, so that the industry can benefit as a whole. If we've got two water companies that are both going through that process of developing digital twins, then surely some of the learnings and some of the work that's been done as part of that should be reusable. But then we may also find instances where something done in the water sector is equally applicable within the energy sector. And that'll become really interesting to actually see that information come to the foreground and see how we can actually support the community as they start to utilize that. And then there's that support network. We want to be kind of not here in this authoritarian stance of this is how thou shalt do it, but actually be there to guide the community to resolve some of the challenges themselves as well, and support one another and work together to actually kind of collectively achieve some of the benefits. And then there's just that piece around, at the moment, I'm not sure anyone understands the full extent of what's going on within the UK. So one of the really important things we need to do is just go out there and talk to people, understand what's going on in the supplier ground, what's going out in the digital twin developer environments, and just start to canvass what's going on. We've obviously got these kind of longer term ambitions to support kind of global initiatives, but before we can do that effectively, we need to understand what's going on within the UK. And then as all as this starts to mature, then hopefully we'll be able to elicit best practices and think about which of those might be developed into standards in the future. So why a hub? And this is actually an important question. We've got these kind of high-level ambitions, which is we can learn by doing, and then obviously the results from that we can start to overcome by sharing and hopefully then succeeding together. But what does that actually mean in reality? And what it means is that as the wider kind of grouping of CDBB and the networks beyond that start to bring to the table really interesting approaches we might want to take, more generalized frameworks that we might be able to use, we need some way through which to actually verify and validate the suitability of these solutions. And this comes back to Mark's point earlier, that we can't just impose on the industry. And it's more than that. We need to be able to actually demonstrate it being successful. As we start to grow this community and grow this hub, it's only going to continue to grow if we can actually demonstrate success. And that's, in my mind, one of the really important roles and responsibilities of the hub. And then if we come around to that point of do we even know yet what we want? And we've got a reasonable guess of some of the things that we're going to need. But there's going to be a load of things that come out over the kind of coming months and coming years that none of us have thought of so far. And that's where the hub can start to identify where those are and then kind of push that over to other groups and other communities to actually start to resolve some of those challenges and think about how we can support and continue to move forward. So we come back to kind of this picture Mark showed earlier of what is a national digital twin. And as he said, a national digital twin, or digital twins as a whole, come together in these kind of geographic groupings, cities, counties, countries. That's kind of a simplistic view because actually, even within that, each of these will have multiple organizations that are involved, owning parts of the infrastructure, consuming parts of the infrastructure. I mean, you have very big companies that own only a small portion of the infrastructure that they're responsible for. So if you take telecoms, BT own the majority of that infrastructure. But you have very big kind of telecom providers that have to integrate within that. So we've got to actually think about how can we make sure that the solutions we're able to support the delivery of are able to satisfy all of those kind of difficulties that we're going to have. And then how do we guide those groupings to work together so that we can start to do some of these more kind of complex and expansive explorations. So what we're doing so far is we've got a grouping, a very small grouping in the first instance, of organizations that are at some point in their journey of developing digital twins. We are just spending time with them at the moment, understanding what they're doing, where they're at, what their aspirations are, so that we can actually take that away and start to think about how we might be able to best support those organizations going forward. Ultimately, these organizations are going to develop digital twins with or without us. Our hope is that if we can actually provide some support and value to them, that we can work together as a collective, and then that aspiration of being able to achieve a national digital twin is one that is actually viable. And that's really how we're planning to work together with them and actually make sure that everyone benefits kind of more as a whole than as individuals. And here just gives you a taste of some of the common challenges that come out. And some of these you'd think we'd actually have resolved. So what is a digital twin? Some people think that it's got to be a completely eidetic representation of the physical, but that might not be what it actually is in reality. And is that viable? How do we manage the legacy assets? What solution should we use? How do I get executive buy-in? What skills are we going to need? And we're not trying to say that the hub or CDBB as a whole has all of these answers, but we want to work with the community to kind of reach an agreed consensus on how we might want to move some of these things forward. And then you start getting onto that piece of, do we need to define a digital twin? And you can kind of think of it as a digital twin, but then each time you peel away a layer, there's actually a lot of complexity housed within that. And yes, in very simplistic terms, data goes in and then some form of to support decision-making comes out, which has an effect on the physical. This is a kind of continued cycle. But actually, you've got humans in that loop, you've got data enrichment, you've got computer code, you've got all of these things circulating around. And actually, we've got to delve into each of these different areas. But again, we could have a discussion all day here and still not reach agreement on what actually a digital twin is. But is what we probably can start to agree on is what some of the values that we can derive from this are. So we'll start to see, hopefully, over the coming years that we have a reduction in risk or we can increase productivity. And then we can start to look at how can we do things like increasing our resilience to the threats that we're aware of today, but also the threats that we're not even foreseeing yet. And how can we make these systems adapt? And yes, it might be an amazing thing where a city is eventually completely autonomous and self-calibrates itself based on changes. But that's not likely to be the reality in any near time. So how can we think about how can we still get benefit from this in the short term, but also make sure we can support that longer-term journey and those longer-term aspirations? But obviously, with this increased value will come increased complexity. And how can we make sure that with complexity, we don't lose accuracy or lose understanding? So it's a really important process we've got to go through. And all of this then is achieved through iteration. So here is an example of a digital twin that's been developed at the Cambridge site. And this is kind of what a lot of people think of with digital twins, and that's not kind of devaluing the solution here. This is amazing. But these things can often be quite expensive and might not be the level of detail that you need for the questions you are trying to ask. So it's just important that we understand that a digital twin could be a very simple thing, but that doesn't mean the complex solutions are any less significant. But we've got a process we've got to go through to get there. So just to give you an idea that we are happening already, we're going to have a kind of, this web presence will be there by the end of the calendar year when we can start to kind of grow and expand the hub, but we're not just sitting on our hands waiting for that to happen. We already have that initial grouping. We've got many organizations that are waiting to be involved, from industry, consultancy, cities, governments, etc. And we're only going to be growing this, and people are already starting to look at us as a collective that is going to help guide and steer that journey. And we encourage anyone that is interested to kind of to connect with us and help stay informed. Alongside this, we've got a very effective steering group of really kind of bright, clever people from across these different aspects, which are going to start to look at how we can address some of these concerns and some of these challenges, and start to provide that support and guidance to industry as we move forward. We'll kind of target things at different levels. We've got a need to support kind of the executives that have got to kind of the financial decision making, but then we've also got to support the doers and the practitioners that are heavily involved. And we, as a steering group, aren't going to have all the answers, but the network that we reach into will be able to kind of draw on that and help really drive this forward, so that we're not just kind of repeatedly hitting problems, but we're actually starting to kind of really push ahead and show what the capabilities of this are. So thanks very much. There's a number of people from the steering group here, so if you'd like, just grab one of the CDBB staff and they can point you at someone and they can give you a bit more information about the Digital Twin Hub. But thanks, everyone.